We begin this hour as we're learning more about the man who gunned down 26 people in Sutherland Springs, Texas during a Sunday morning church service. The Air Force has admitted to not sharing his criminal record with the FBI, which could have prevented him from purchasing a firearm. We have team coverage of the worst mass shooting in Texas history. RT correspondent David Miller is live in Washington with more on what we are learning about the suspect. But let's start at the scene with RT's Natasha Sweatte. Natasha, how is the community coping 2 days after this tragedy?
Well, good evening to you, Anya. You know, the man that this town is calling a hero shares what went through his mind when he left his house barefoot to stop the shooter. This, as the community is now coming together the best way they know how, through prayer.
What we thinking for the move? And Father, right now.
Prayer circles popping up all over in Monday night's vigil in Sutherland Springs, remembering the 26 lives that were taken from this earth too soon.
I'm still in shock. It's unbelievable. I don't have all the words to say for it, but, you know, we just got to keep moving on.
And for Antonia Rash, that also means remembering her friend, 14-year-old Annabelle Pomeroy, the pastor's daughter who was among the dead.
That's why we're all here united as a youth, you know, because we lost someone, and we lost a sister to us, which was Annabelle, you know. And attending the church was like I said, as a family.
The man many are calling a hero for engaging in a shootout with the church gunman is a former NRA instructor. Living just blocks from the First Baptist Church, Stephen Williford said his daughter alerted him about the gunfire she was hearing. Williford says he dropped everything, grabbed his rifle, and ran out barefoot to the church. Even though Devin Kelley was reportedly wearing tactical gear, Williford shot the gunman twice, once in the torso where there was a gap in his gear, and another gunshot to his leg.
People at that church, they're friends of mine, their family. And every time I heard a shot, I knew that that probably represented a life. I was scared to death.
Scared or not, Williford jumped into Johnny Langendorf's car, a stranger at the time, while they chased down Kelley until his car eventually crashed. Authorities say he then called his dad, said that he wasn't going to make it, then shot himself in the head. The shooter may be gone, but the pain in this tragedy remains present, and the people in shock.
It's horrendous. Yes, it's quite a shock, especially folks being in church on a Sunday morning.
Never would think that anything like this had happened in our little community. Never.
Now, officials obtained a search warrant for the shooter's phone, but investigators said today that they have not been able to retrieve any information from it thus far, as the phone is locked. And investigators said that they will not disclose at this time the type of phone that the shooter had. And we're also learning the shooter was briefly in a mental institution back in 2012 in New Mexico. So, of course, a lot of information still coming from this investigation. Anya.
Natasha Sweatte, RT correspondent, live in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Many questions arising from the handling of criminal records of Devin Kelley by the Air Force, and also now new details, as Natasha alluded to, that the church gunman escaped a mental health facility in 2012. RT's David Miller has the details of that investigation as it heats up. David?
Yeah, following those tragic events in Texas, the DOD has requested that the Inspector General to review the handling of criminal records in the case of the former airman after his 2012 domestic violence convictions. Kelley was found guilty by a general court-martial on 2 charges of domestic assault against his wife and his stepson under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The investigation did determine whether or not information about Kelley's conviction was entered into the National Criminal Information Center database. Kelley was charged with assault, according to Air Force records, which states he repeatedly struck, kicked, and choked his first wife and hit his stepson's head with what the Air Force described as a force likely to produce death. And prosecutors did withdraw several other charges as part of the plea agreement with Kelley, including allegations that he repeatedly pointed a loaded gun at his wife. He was ultimately sentenced in November that year of 12 months confinement and reduction to the lowest possible rank. His final duty title was prisoner, and Kelley's punitive discharge was a bad conduct discharge, and it did not prohibit him from owning a gun, as a dishonorable discharge would have. Under federal law, anyone convicted by a crime punishable by imprisonment for 1 year is prohibited from possessing a firearm. And the same is true for anyone convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. And Kelley's conviction did qualify under both of those categories. And now the question is, did the Air Force violate the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act and also the Lautenberg Amendment, which both have provisions that mandate federal background checks, including when discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions or any convicted court of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. And while the military is not responsible for the actions of the shooter, many are questioning and have questions arising from whether or not the Air Force and the military as a whole is protecting soldiers from domestic violence convictions. And why was Kelley not given a dishonorable discharge?
Important questions indeed. RT's David Miller reporting from the newsroom. Thanks a lot.